It's hump day. It's Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. You can be as excited or not as excited about it being Wednesday, but I'm excited because we're on this podcast and we're having a great time. Welcome into another Strictly Stripes off-season edition. Muhammad Ahmad here with you, with Andrew Gillis. Mike Nizick will be back at it on Thursday. We continue rounding up our positional previews across the defense. We've talked about the linebackers. We've talked about every side of the defensive line, and now we're going to move up north to the secondary, but specifically today we're going to talk about the cornerbacks. We'll talk about the safeties later this week, but looking at the cornerbacks, simply put, they are going to have a lot of needs to fill because you have 3 unrestricted free agents this offseason in the cornerback room. That's tied for the most with any other position on the defense because you have 3 safeties going into free agency, which we'll talk about. You have you have 3 linebackers going into free agency, but with the cornerbacks, you have Jalen Davis, Eli Apple, who we've talked a lot about. We'll get back to him in a bit. And then, of course, Trey Flowers. So, Andrew, right off the bat, and this might be kind of a loaded question, but you look at those 3, and I don't think it's impossible for the Bengals to keep all 3 of them. I think it's very difficult, especially with Flowers, which we'll talk about. But out of those 3, who do you want to see stay? Who do you want to see go, and why?
I think I would probably bid adieu to Eli Apple. Nothing against Eli, but Eli probably wants to start. He probably wants a place where he's going to see significant reps, and obviously you never know what could happen. But you've got Cam Taylor-Britt and Chidobe Awuzie, who we're going to talk about here soon. You got those 2, presumably you're starting outside corners. Mike Hilton is your nickel. Those are your 3. And we've seen Dax Hill kind of move into a slot role if need be. But if you're going to play him at safety next year, I think, as weird as it might sound, I think, honestly, I would probably lean towards re-signing Jalen Davis. Even if it's to a 1-year deal, just kind of kick the can down the road. I think you really kind of need a Mike Hilton replacement. Zach Taylor was pretty high on Jalen Davis when he talked about him when Mike Hilton was injured. So I think if you keep a Jalen Davis, you can kind of replace around the edges with the Trey Flowers and with an Eli Apple. So like if you had to replace one, or if you had to only keep one, I would honestly choose Jalen Davis, just because I'm not sure. I think he's going to be cheap, and I think that Eli and Trey Flowers would command a little bit more money. Eli is probably going to look for a starting role elsewhere. Wouldn't be surprised if Trey does either. So I think that that's kind of the guy, because you don't want to be, moving guys inside and out. It's a little bit like offensive line. It's a different type of feel. It's a different type of position if you're playing outside corner and inside corner. So you want to have that position kind of taken care of, and I think Jalen Davis would do that for you.
Yeah, your basic corners are pretty much taken care of. You have Chidobe Awuzie, who again is coming off of a very rough ACL injury, but then you have Cam Taylor-Britt, who we're going to talk about here in just a bit. But yeah, it's really that slot side, because you have Mike Hilton down for next year, but your other 2 slot corners, not named Dax Hill, who, like we said, and what we're going to talk about tomorrow is going to be a safety, is Jalen Davis and Trey Flowers. I think Davis you can keep for cheap. I mean, he's only really played like 34 games in the last 3 years. He's played, to where he's at 13 tackles. It doesn't sound like a lot, although in his defense, Zach Taylor has said that he's one of the best cornerbacks you could find on any of the 32 teams on a 53-man roster. So, there's a reason why they took a chance on him, when they signed him as a free agent 3 years ago. Even with how little he's played, it shows you the trust they have in him if they need him to step up. But, there's concerns I have between Eli Apple and Trey Flowers. The most concerns I'd have are with Flowers, because his market value, according to Spot Track, is anywhere north of $11.5 million a year. To me, that's a lot of money for a guy like that. No disrespect to him. In the year and a half he's been in Cincinnati when they got him off waivers in 2021, I think he's been fine. He's a slot corner who they've usually, as we've mentioned on this podcast, he's more of your sub-package corner slot guy that you use on tight ends. So think of Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Cameron Brate, to name some of the guys he's gone against. I think he picked up steam in the second half of the year. I think he played really well against like I mentioned, Cameron Brate in Tampa Bay. I think he played really well against him, and he had an interception in that game. But look at, the blown touchdown he had against Mark Andrews in Week 5 in primetime. Big reason why they lost that game, among many, obviously. But, his first half of the season was just very shaky, and I don't know if he played well enough in the second half to make it up. I think, for what he's asking for or what his agent will probably negotiate for, that's a lot of money. And like someone like Logan Wilson is probably valued for about the same amount of money, and we're talking about extending him, locking him down. I'd much rather see that money go towards a similar contract for someone like Logan Wilson, who it probably is worth more than the $10-11 million, but with where he's in his career, I think you could extend him for that much money. I don't know if you want to put that on someone like Trey Flowers, who, in his defense could probably be a starter somewhere else. I don't know exactly where. I'd have to look down the list, but there's a lot of teams that could use a slot corner, and I think he'd fit in well. I mean, with Eli Apple, it just comes down to this. Number one, well, really three things, actually. I contradicted myself. Number one, I don't think the Bengals need him. I think they could hit somewhere else in free agency, which we'll talk about later in the show, because here's what really concerns me. He had the highest missed tackle percentage among all defenders, just about over 12.5%. I think just like with Flowers, he played a better second half of the year, but I don't think it was good enough to where he can come back and be a starter. I think your starters are going to be Chidobe Awuzie and Cam Taylor-Britt. Does it mean the Bengals don't bring him back? No, but if I were the Bengals, I wouldn't, because he's getting closer to 30. He's very well respected in that locker room, and Lou Anarumo likes him. They have a lot of history together, but I mean, it's a business at the end of the day, friends or not. I don't know if, you want to spend all that money, because he's worth over $11 million too. Like, do you want to keep, a guy like that for that much money to only play a handful of snaps when you got Cam Taylor-Britt and Chidobe Awuzie? I don't know. I don't think you do. And I think that's where, Jalen Davis is the cheaper option. I think you got to let Trey Flowers and Eli Apple walk. And the third thing I was going to say about Apple, and I want to ask you this. Personally, I don't think he'll go to another team as a starter. Do you think he's still capable of being a starter in the NFL, or am I being too harsh?
Well, I think it depends. I think if you're talking about a team that, maybe has an elite corner, and they're kind of looking for a second guy, he's not going to go anywhere and be a number one, shut it down, he's the guy. But I do think that, it's a possibility for him to go somewhere and get some meaningful playing time. In Cincinnati, I think Cheeto was better than him, and you don't want to take away reps from a guy like Cam Taylor-Britt.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure how often that you're really kind of putting a fourth corner on the field. That to me just doesn't really feel like a situation that's going to present itself a lot. You're not going to go. You're not going to do. You're just not going to do that where you add a guy like that. So to me, I think Eli Apple could go somewhere and play. I don't know if it would be in a every down role, but I absolutely think he could get some playing time elsewhere, because I just don't think it would work in Cincinnati.
I agree. Yeah, I think he did the best he could. They gave him a 1-year deal last year to prove himself. And again, I think overall, you could say he maybe did a little bit better than he did in year one. But like I said, he just was not consistent enough, and I think he's just aging to where you got Cam Taylor-Britt. If you didn't have him and you wanted to draft someone like him this year, so basically whatever happened last year, like if that were to happen this year, I'd say, okay, bring him back on a 1 year, let him prove himself. That already happened, been there, done that. I think you move on and you wish him well. The good thing for the Bengals, though, is going into this offseason, and granted it's because they have so many free agents in the secondary, right now they're spending only $23.3 million-ish against the cap with their secondary. That's almost half of what they spent last year, which was about $45 million, which was mostly because they had to put the franchise tag on Jesse Bates, which was about $12 million, which, by the way, they are eligible to tag him again, but don't expect that to happen because $15.5 million, which I think is what the salary cap would be for Bates, or not salary cap, the franchise tag against the salary cap, that's a lot of money. And I think we've already said before, and we'll talk about more tomorrow. I mean, Jesse Bates is done as a Bengal. I think he's moving on. And he could be going to the Falcons because his agent had dinner with a couple other Falcons players that he represents. But again, I think because you have that room, you can spend on other free agents. And a big reason why you have that room, Andrew, is because Cam Taylor-Britt was a steal, literally and figuratively. Being a second-round pick, making the impact he had, even having after a core injury in the preseason and going into the first weeks of the year. his cap hit is going to be less than $2 million on his remaining 3 years. Like, that's really cheap. That's the reason why I think the Bengals have a little more room to spend in free agency and with the draft at the corner position. And like you said, he's a surefire starter. I don't think that's a guy you want to take reps away from. Is it too bold or too crazy to think that he could play at a Pro Bowl level next season?
Yeah. I think you can. I mean, if you're going to talk about a guy that's going to play at a Pro Bowl level, I think Chidobe Awuzie is that guy. Obviously, health is a big thing with him, but with Cam Taylor-Britt, I don't know that he's going to rise to that level yet. One of the reasons that I really kind of liked him in the more that he played was he's freakishly athletic. He's got great speed. He's got great recovery speed. I think you saw that in the AFC divisional round when they played the Bills. He got beat deep by Gabe Davis, and he had the speed to catch up and knock the ball away and prevent a big play. Like, when you have that ability, that kind of buys you a little bit of runway. It buys you a little bit of time because you can do things. You can make mistakes that might kill another cornerback. Because if another cornerback's not as fast as you, you're in trouble if you make that same mistake because you don't have that recovery speed. So, I think Cam Taylor-Britt, I think it was pretty clear that he got better. I don't think at the beginning of the year he was great. I don't think he was like a liability. But he wasn't what he was towards the end of the season, and I would think that with a full off season and especially adding a guy like Chidobe Awuzie on the other side, I think that helps him. So I think I'm high on Cam Taylor-Britt moving forward. You have him for another 3 more years on a rookie deal, like you said. So Pro Bowl's a stretch for me. I don't know if that feels a little too rose-colored glasses to me, but. I think he's going to evolve into a player that kind of like we saw towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree, and I think maybe not now. I don't think next year. I mean, like you're asking him to basically be a Ahmad Sauce Gardner, who was an All-Pro and Pro Bowler and Defensive Rookie of the Year. Like, I think that's asking for a lot. I don't think it's unrealistic to think that he will get there, though. I think if he can double the growth that he had in, that short span in last season going into this season, I absolutely think that, for his experience, he can be one of the best cornerbacks. Not overall, just for a guy who will have, 2 years of experience, I think he would be one of the best corners in that class. Because really, I mean, the only other cornerback from his rookie year that was better is, like I just said his name, Ahmad Sauce Gardner, which, again, first round pick, reason why he got all those honors I mentioned. I think the next guy with the best experience and talent after someone like that is Cam Taylor-Britt. But you talked about his athleticism, his ability to stay foot for foot with even some of the best, like, Mike Evans in Tampa Bay, and then in the playoffs, Stephon Diggs. What else really stood out to you about Cam Taylor-Britt, and what separates him from other cornerbacks, regardless of experience, in your eyes?
Well, I think the number one thing that I would say is that his speed. I know I just kind of mentioned it a lot, but not a lot of corners have that level of athleticism. You kind of look at his size. He's not the biggest corner in the world. He's not like one of those guys that's like a Trey Flowers type or the corner's name from Seattle, whose name I'm forgetting, who was a really good rookie. You mentioned that. That the what's his name? Tariq Woolen. That's his name.
There we go. Tariq Woolen.
He was better than Cam Taylor-Britt. He and Sauce Gardner were the class of that rookie corner, but they got him. The Seahawks got him in the 5th round. He was a 6'4" corner. So there's more than one way to skin a cat at the cornerback position. You don't have to be super big. You don't have to be super small and kind of play that slot. You can kind of do a couple different things. And I think the thing that makes Cam, an NFL level player is that athleticism. And I mean, you got to be some kind of confident at that position. He's obviously a really confident guy. And I think that, as like I said, as the year went on, when you start to have the game slow down for you, when you start to understand things a little bit better, when you start to look at the moves that people make and kind of understand the game and, the moves that receivers are going to make on you and things like that, that just comes naturally. And then you pair that athleticism with it. So, there's things that kind of you can learn, but the athleticism for now, that's what separates him.
I almost forgot about Tariq Woolen, but at the same time, though, like you said, the kid's 6'4", the Seattle Seahawks corner, Woolen, he's 6'4", and then, I mean, Taylor Britt didn't play the first 4 games of his season, and he was coming off an injury, so I think maybe I'm stretching when I say this. I think if he wasn't hurt and he played how he was playing at the end of the year, if he kind of like started playing like that at the beginning of the year, like, and then built on that, then you could put him in that conversation. But again, I think that's more of a what if type of situation. So I could be crazy for saying this, but man, if there was a top 5 Cam Taylor Britt's like quote story that either of us were doing, I mean, the number one quote that sticks out to me is when, I forget who asked him this. I think it was Charlie Goldsmith from the Inquirer who asked him, like what separates you? Kind of like I just asked you what separates you. Like, he asked him what separates you from other receivers. Like, what do you like to do differently against them? And he said, be physical. They don't like you when you play soft or something along those lines. But he just basically said, oh, yeah, they don't like it if you play physical. There's, you got to tiptoe the line between, cocky and confident. And I think he did just that.
Cam, for people listening that don't know, Cam is my favorite person to talk to in the locker room.
Yeah.
I've never seen him not smile.
Oh, yeah.
He laughs at everything. He's like bubbly is probably like the way to describe it. Like, he's smiling at everything. He's laughing at everything. He's got probably like the happiest personality I've seen on the team. But like some of he's really funny. Like the one you mentioned the one that I had stuck out to me was I remember I think it was the Panthers game where it was like 35-0 at the end of the first half or whatever that was. And, I asked him, I was like, have you ever been in a game like that where, I mean, you guys really weren't on the field a lot? And he laughed and he goes, man, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but I played at Nebraska. So no, I haven't. And I just thought that was really funny. Like he's really, really like self-aware for a kid who's 23 years old. And I think that, obviously the confidence part is key to playing that position, but, yeah, I mean, everything he like you said, you can kind of run like a weekly Cam. Here's what Cam Taylor Britt said this week. He's a really, really entertaining guy to speak with.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a taste of what we're going to get next year, and I'm actually looking forward to that. But, I mean, that's a good one. Who was my favorite player to talk in the locker room? I'd say either Hayden Hurst or Hakeem Adeniji. I'd say Adeniji because I actually see him a lot outside of the stadium because we both go to the Islamic Center in northern Cincinnati. So I would see him and Khalid Kareem before he went to the Colts. But, I would see Hakeem every Friday. So I feel like I already saw him a lot. And I think, we just kind of got used to each other like that. And he's just a really chill, down-to-earth guy. But I really like Hayden Hurst because, he's very big on mental health and he's very vocal about it. And I've, talked to him about it just on the side and, actually just genuinely kind of learned from his experience. So I think that just by default, aside from him being a great guy, I think is just also why I enjoy talking to him. But when we come back, we're going to talk about another great guy in the Bengals locker room, Chidobe Awuzie, who we mentioned earlier in the show, his impact, his significance, what the future is like for him in the Bengals.
Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Neislick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today.
And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we talked about this year's free agents, the ascension of Cam Taylor-Britt and where that fits in the grand scheme of things. But the other piece to the puzzle for the Bengals cornerback room is Chidobe Awuzie. We've talked about it. He suffered a season-ending ACL tear against Cleveland on Monday Night Football back in Week 8, and that's why Cam Taylor-Britt leapfrogged into that role. Baptism by fire, if you want to call it that, among many things. But at the same time, though, if we do look a little bit ahead, Awuzie will be a free agent going into 2024. And maybe that's a talk more for next year as to whether you keep him or not. But if you think about it, his cap hit's going to be just shy of $8 million this coming season. And again, you have a lot of cap space right now, even with Awuzie's $8 million being factored into that. You got a lot of cap space to work with next year. But that's going to be a lot tougher in 2024 when, the cap hit from Joe Burrow's contract kicks in. If they extend Logan Wilson, which, I think they should personally, and I'll be writing something about this on cleveland.com explaining why. I think if you do extend him and you extend T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, it just gets harder and harder that's where the tough decisions kick in long term. But to kind of go back to the here and now, do you start planning for a future Andrew without Chidobe Awuzie, or is that a position you focus on in the draft, regardless of what happens to Cheeto, just given the fact that you could lose Trey Flowers and or Eli Apple, and maybe that's not an area you want to spend on in the free agency sector? Where do you kind of plan for that in the grand scheme of things in the draft?
Well, I'm a big draft guy as a whole. I've said it before. I would try to pick 10 to 12 times a year if I were every NFL team. I really think draft picks are not valued enough. I think teams need to trade back more than they do. So I would be taking the draft route is the way that I would go. I think, I was kind of writing this today, and this will go up later on our website. But, one of the things that I was kind of looking at is I think corner might be a sneaky ad for the Bengals, because right now everybody's kind of looking at it. Okay, well, maybe they need an offensive lineman. We talked about offensive tackle, and okay, well, maybe they could add a tight end. Okay, well, what if Bijan's there? Like there's a lot of different. Okay, well, what if maybe they take a linebacker if you're going to lose if you're going to lose Jermaine Pratt. Like there's different things you can talk yourself into, but I look at cornerback, and the game is a passing game. And what did I say the other day about linebackers? You need to rush the pass on defense. You need to rush the passer, and you need to defend the pass. And the two ways you do that are pass rushers and cornerbacks. And I think that when you are looking at this list, it would be a cold day in hell if the Bengals draft a player named Joey Porter Jr. Now, I don't think they would, because I don't think he'd be there. But Joey Porter Jr. is a top 20 player in the draft. He's a really, really good corner. So if he's there, you really got to think about it. But I kind of draw my attention to a guy like Kelee Ringo at 28. If you don't know his name, he was the guy who he returned the interception for a touchdown against Alabama in the national title game that kind of won the game. It was that, that big, exciting play. So, he's obviously played on some great defenses. He's a really talented player. He's a little longer too at 6'2". So you can add him, a guy who kind of lit up the Senior Bowl, Julius Brents. He's out of Kansas State. He's 6'4". Wow. Decent speed. I think he's like a 4'5", 4'6" guy. So it's not great. You're not talking about a burner. You're not talking about like a Cam Taylor-Britt guy. But when you're 6'4", you don't really need to be that. And like we were talking about, if you're going to let Trey Flowers go, I don't hate that as adding Julius Brents as a guy who can come in and because whoever you draft at corner, like the Chidobe Awuzie stuff. He tore his ACL on Halloween, so who knows what his return is going to be like. He didn't really give a lot at breakdown day about what his return looks like, what his schedule looks like, what his training regimen looks like. So we're really not going to know until we talk to Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor next week, and maybe even later than that. But if he's able to go, you can kind of do the thing that you plan for with Cam Taylor-Britt, where you have a guy like Julius Brents play backup for a year, and then he can play your Trey Flowers role. Like, to me, you can never have enough corners. You can never have enough pass rushers. So if you're going to draft a corner at 28, like if they pick Keely Ringo at 28, cool. Like if they pick Julius Brents in round 2, cool. Like there's really, to me, it's the Mean Girls line. The limit does not exist. Like you can go into a year and have a ton of corners and a ton of pass rushers, and you should be fine with it. So there's a lot of interesting names, and I think kind of you worry about getting too close to the painting to where you can't see the picture, but if the more you look at it, the more you're like, corner might not be the worst addition for the world for the Bengals.
Yeah, talking about Mean Girls, maybe we'll change it to Mean Scouts because we're talking about football here. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned all those names, and by the way, it's not like Joey Porter Jr.'s dad happens to be, a legendary linebacker who won a Super Bowl with the Steelers. I mean, so I would say the apple definitely didn't fall far from the tree. Sarcasm. But, you mentioned all those names. Brent's was a good one. I didn't really think much about that until you talked about his size, which, by the way, Trey Flowers is, at least documented to what we know, is the tallest cornerback in the NFL. So you get a 6'4" cornerback, no matter where Trey Flowers goes, that's going to be your tallest corner in the league because I guess, did you say Tariq Woolen was 6'4"? I guess I contradicted myself.
Woolen, yeah, they have him listed at 6'4" as well.
So I guess, okay, until this year, he was the tallest one. So sorry, Trey, you lost that distinction. But I mean, 6'3", you're still up there, especially if you want to get specific with like the quarter inches or whatever. But I mean, another name that sticks out to me, and I think I mentioned him when we talked about the Senior Bowl. I think Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois is an interesting one. I mean, you look at his PFF stats, he had one of the best grades on PFF as far as pass coverage and passer rating against opposing quarterbacks. And, people look at Illinois as a team that was kind of a bottom feeder in the Big Ten, but that doesn't matter because, you have him, you have Chase Brown, a potential running back candidate, and his brother, who is a cornerback candidate as well. I think his brother, Sidney, if he's not a cornerback, I think he's a safety, but either way, he's a defensive back that's worth looking at. So there's a couple Illinois fighting the line.
I would say if Witherspoon is there, and if you're the Bengals and you're sitting at 28 and Witherspoon is there, run. Him. Do not walk, run to the podium with that card and take Witherspoon. He's kind of being talked about as like a number one cornerback that's going to go in the top 10. So if he's there, sprint to the podium and take him, and then deal with whatever you got to deal with later.
Do you take him over Michael Mayer if you don't have Hayden Hurst?
Oh, easy. Yeah. Like,
I agree.
I think I'm a big Mayer guy. I think the comp for him, I think you could make a case that he's not going to be the best tight end, like in terms of ceiling. I think you could say that he's not the best tight end in the class. I think that you could say that Darnell Washington has a higher ceiling. He's 6'7". Yep. He's more athletic. I think you could kind of make that case and say, like, look, if he hits, you're talking about like an Antonio Gates level player. Like, I could see that. But I just think that Mayer, you know what you're getting. I think he's going to be a good pro for a really long time. Notre Dame is a program that produces tight ends. I think like every week one starting tight end at Notre Dame since like 2002 has been drafted into the NFL. They produce tight ends really, really well. You know what you're getting with Mayer. So that's a plus. But Witherspoon, like if you get the chance to take a corner of that ability, you take him. I personally, I don't think he's going to fall like past like 12. But if he does, and if he gets to like 16, something like that, then you need to start having a conversation about trading up because he's going to be very, very good, I think. Oh yeah, and I'm not a trade up guy, as I just said, but Witherspoon is really, really good, and adding a cornerback like that doesn't come along often, especially when you're talking about a guy like people are talking about him going like floor 10th to Philly. He's a guy that you really, really, really got to look at hard if he starts to fall. But yeah, I would be stunned if he's there at 28.
Well, if you're talking about like a perfect off-season type image and you're talking about the draft, I mean, you make a good case there because like he kind of said, like if whether you want to put him in the slot, which by the way, he actually does play the slot as well. He doesn't just play man to man. He does play as a nickel corner. You know, you want to put him in the slot for a year, or, you know, like you said with Chidobe Awuzie, if, you know, he's not ready by week 1, which I wouldn't be shocked if he isn't, you could be starting Cam Taylor-Britt, and again, this is in a world where you have Witherspoon. You could be starting both of them in week 1 until whenever Cheeto gets back, and then at that point you kind of put him behind the slot again, like we mentioned, and then if Cheeto's not back, then that's your guy in 2024. That would not be a bad move. And like you said, I mean, like if you need an offensive lineman or a tight end, I know offensive lineman is probably the bigger need for the Bengals, but like if you're in a situation like that where Witherspoon's really close to you and you can trade up, then just get an offensive lineman in the second or third round, because I'll talk more about this kind of when we get close to the combine, but I don't know if the Bengals will even get a home run hitting offensive lineman by that point in the draft. Kind of like last year. I mean, there were no offensive linemen available for the Bengals at that point, so that's why they went with Dax Hill. On top of the Jesse Bates saga, I still think that was the best option anyway, because all the best linemen were taken like within the first 20, 25 picks, and the Bengals were like pick number 31. So, I mean, they're a little bit lower in the first round, but it's the same scenario, I think, which we can talk more about. But I know you said you're more of a draft guy, but let's say, you know, before the draft even gets here, free agency opens up in a couple weeks, which is so hard to believe, 3 weeks to be exact. You know, the Bengals maybe want to hit free agency. Maybe they want to shop for, you know, that cornerback kind of like they did with Eli and Chidobe Awuzie 3 years ago. They want to shop for that next person. You know, I look at some names, and they're not like eye-popping, but maybe you look at Isaiah Oliver, who played as a reserve in Atlanta. You got Anthony Averett, you know, Bradley Roby, who won a Super Bowl with the Broncos, you know, was just with the Saints. Trey Herndon. You know, as a matter of fact, if you want to look inside the AFC North, I mean, if you want to get really cheap, A.J. Green, not the Bengals A.J. Green, you know, the same cornerback, granted, who picked off Joe Burrow. So, I mean, if you can pick off Joe Burrow, that must say something. Maybe this is a stretch. I don't know if the Ravens keep him, but Kyle Fuller is also a free agent. Maybe the Bengals pursue him. I've seen a lot of talk about James Bradbury, who, of course, became infamous after his hold in the Super Bowl. He's actually going to be a free agent. I don't know if the Bengals want to go after him because he might be a little more pricey since he just had a Pro Bowl year. But are there any names that I just mentioned or didn't mention that you think the Bengals could take a shot at in free agency for depth?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'd be looking towards the guys at the bottom of the list. You know, and admittedly, I mean, I don't know a ton about those guys just because I don't think you're adding a starting corner in free agency. Right. Like, I don't think you're going after, like, Marcus Peters is a scheduled free agent. Bradley Roby, James Bradbury. Like, you're not going after those guys. You're not going, like, if Cam Sutton reaches free agency, you're not going after him. Like, I don't think you're going after those type of players. You know, you're going after the depth guys, the guys who you're going to need to play on special teams. So, I think like in the draft, it's a best player available thing. If you know, if you're sitting there and Keely Ringo's there at 28 and you got him valued at 15, take him. But in free agency, I don't care if you think that, you know, Marcus Peters is going to be really good next year. I just don't see that as a fit.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, like you said, if you're going to get a cornerback in free agency, like, you got to get cheap with it. I, again, mentioned that they have a lot of room to work with, but even if you get someone for like $1 million a year, $2 million a year, that's going to start to add up, especially once, you know, maybe, you know, if Bates leaves, they add, you know, another safety for depth, and then, you know, it just all adds up. I think, you know, just because you have a lot of room with cap space in the secondary doesn't mean you want to eat all of it up. I think last year they were able to because they had the second highest cap hit in the secondary. But again, it's because you had a franchise tag and because Joe Burrow was not going to get locked down with a Brinks truck worth of money, which, by the way, I saw a Brinks truck driving in Cincinnati. Someone posted it on Twitter, and they're like, oh, Joe Burrow's contract money is here. And who knows? I mean, whether that's his money or not, like, he's going to get a Brinks truck. So don't think that the secondary will get just as much. I think, you know, you have to be conservative in that aspect. You don't want to break the bank too much there. And again, like, A.J. Green could be someone really cheap. Isaiah Oliver could be someone cheap. He's already played as a reserve. But, you know, like the Bradburys, the Robies, I think those guys you want to stay away from because, you know, they're going to ask for a lot of money. I mean, if you don't want to pay Eli Apple $11 million or Trey Flowers $11 million, I still don't think you want to pay those guys half of that. Like, even if you want to pay Bradley Roby half of the $10 million he made last year, I don't think it's worth it because that guy is way out of his prime, and it's been 8 years since he won a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. And he really hasn't done anything flashy since then, even though he played in Houston and New Orleans. So I think you just got to get cheap. I mean, who knows? Maybe there's some other names on the list that they try to go for, but really, I just think that's one of those positions where be cheap. Kind of like how they got Jalen Davis, 3 years ago. I'd imagine them getting a Jalen Davis, but for, someone to be behind Cam Taylor-Britt or Cheeto, or ironically behind Mike Hilton, because you're probably going to lose Trey Flowers. So I think, with the secondary, at least with the cornerbacks, get cheap in free agency, but be the opposite in the draft. Be aggressive, especially if Devin Witherspoon is there, because like Andrew said, that's a guy that you trade up for, and Andrew doesn't even trade up. If he's a GM of a team,
trading up is bad. Unless you are going to get a quarterback, trading up is bad.
Oh, yeah. Well, Andrew, the funny thing is we've talked so much about Joe Burrow, the number one priority, the extension for Joe Burrow. Guess what? Joe Burrow's contract extension was not the first move the Bengals made re-signing a player, because they re-signed Cal Adamitis. So I guess Joe Burrow is just not...
They got the long snapper.
They got the long snapper. I guess
long snappers because they're important until you realize you don't have one. But.
Oh yeah. I guess Joe Burrow is not the priority. It's Cal Adamitis. But in all seriousness, good for him. He deserves it. To do what he did, playing 15 games in the regular season, all 3 playoff games, getting a game ball in Buffalo, it's well deserved. And I think we'll talk more about this, the special teams on Friday, because you saved the best for last in our roundup. At this point, I think Clark Harris, him being a free agent, I think they're going to move on from him, stick with Cal. He had a great run the last 14 years in Cincinnati, but just like with Kevin Huber, who they did not keep after the 2022 season, I think you do the same with Clark Harris. So I guess, I wanted to maybe save that for last. Congrats, Cal Adamitis. But Joe Burrow, your time is coming soon. Don't worry. You're going to get your fair share as well. Well, stay tuned, because tomorrow we're going to continue the secondary talk, this time shifting into the safety position, talking about the likelihood of Von Bell staying, more about what it means to lose Jesse Bates, which is inevitable at this point, and much, much more on that side of the defense. But once again, for myself and Andrew Gillis, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Catch you Thursday. Enjoy the rest of your hump day.